feel like you can connect what's going on with the way we interact with one another on social media with what seems to be going on, say, just in political discourse or what's going on elsewhere. Yeah. It's like the whole way we are learning to interact with other people and spending more and more time interacting with other people is in this. It's like, what did you said? Plato's saying, like, love of victory. Philonikia?
Nike, victory? Philonikia. Right?
Philonikia.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, it strikes me as it's like trying to prove that I am this thing that is nailed down and you are this thing nailed down.
Yes.
And my this thing is more than your this thing.
Notice it's an attempt to become substantial, like to get this connectedness. But of course, it's not. It's not going to make you substantial. That's the very thing. That's the very problem with it. I agree with you, and I think it's gone very much into the political arena. I think what we're witnessing, witnessing it in England, witnessing it in the United States. I think it's coming to Canada, although because of Canada has this particular history. We weren't born out of a revolution, and we have Quebec, and so we don't get swept quite as quickly into extremes. I'm not saying we're immune, but it hasn't happened quite as powerfully here. But what you can see in the political discourse emerging, right, is look, there used to be a shared commitment to the process. It used to be, I'm fallible, you're fallible, we disagree, and we're going to disagree, and we're going to argue, and I'm going to oppose you. But the idea is, right, that we're going to be checks and balances on each other, and the whole process of democracy will be self-correcting. It's like this opponent processing model, right? And the idea is we above and beyond our commitment to the party, we are committed to democracy and to the nation. That's gone. You can look at polls. And there's some differences. The Republicans seem to be faster at this than the Democrats, but they're both heading in the same direction, where their allegiance to the party is the only true allegiance. Like they're not really committed, right, to democracy. Like, would you give up? Would you vote against your party if it was clear to you that it would help solve an important problem within it? No, I won't vote against my party ever. Right?
Yeah.
Don't you want your problem solved? Yeah. Yeah, do you have the same thing happening there?
Oh, we have it even worse. There was a really good documentary. So everyone knows we have Brexit here now.
Yeah, yes.
Well, the prime minister who called the referendum was this guy David Cameron.
Right. Yeah.
And, when he went to the European Union, basically the thing is within the Conservative Party there is maybe not a majority, maybe not a minority. Somewhere close to half of the Conservative MPs wanted to leave the European Union. So to get them on side to endorse him as leader, he promised a whole lot of stuff to them, like no changing of treaties, blah, 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 all these things. And then he went to Europe and was banging on the table being like, no, you can't do this. We're rejecting this, blah, blah, blah. And all the European leaders are baffled because they're like, wait, this isn't you're not here representing the opinion of the British people. You're here representing your commitment to a couple of your backbench MPs.
Yes,
and then ultimately the Brexit referendum that was called was another just one of those commitments to his backbench MPs, and also to try and make sure they didn't lose too many votes to UKIP, even though there was, about a third of the country wanted to have a referendum to begin with.
Right.
It was ultimately him acting in the interests of his own leadership and of his party, and actually thinking about the potential consequences for the country. And he went into it thinking oh, well, there's no way we're going to lose. Here we are. He immediately quit after the referendum because he realized the horrible mistake he had made. But obviously, the irony is, maybe it's not irony, but all these European leaders are there, representing their countries, and then the leader of Britain is there representing his party. And it's, we are now living out the sort of terrible effects of, sort of that kind of narcissistic politics.
Yes, that's very well put. Narcissistic politics and adversarial, because narcissism, right, the narcissism of small differences. The narcissistic project is about continually noticing whatever differences there are and magnifying them as much as you can, because that is the way in which you guarantee your unique status. And so narcissism is a profoundly divisive and adversarial way of being. And so that's what you see happening. That's what I mean. The political discourse has has devolved into, you know, trying to demolish and destroy the opposition at all costs. Not because of some larger vision other than those guys are evil and we must destroy them. That's sort of what the vision is now. And the problem is, and you see this in poll after poll after poll, the issues that people are really concerned about are not being addressed. Right? You know, people are actually concerned about the environment. They're concerned about growing socioeconomic disparity. They're concerned about the, you know, the decay of public education. They're concerned about all of these, and yet these are not coming to the center of any real problem solving being done in the political arena. I don't think. I mean, so I'm speaking of myself now. I don't think the solution to this is going to come out of some kind of political leadership. I'm not saying politics is irrelevant and you shouldn't vote or anything ridiculous like that. You should try and make a difference. But what I'm saying is I think that the political arena has become so infected with the bullshit and the symptomologies, the symptoms, I should say, of the meaning crisis, that I don't think it is an arena in which we can find an efficacious response to the meaning crisis. One of the gifts of the series is I'm getting to meet tons of people, lots of people who are out there putting real time and talent, making communities, creating ecologies of practices, trying to create new traditions, and they're trying to network together, and I'm doing the best I can to try and help afford that. And so I think there is a growing cultural response to this. Now, the issue, I mean, I don't believe in destiny or anything like that. The issue is we're in a race. Can that cultural response grow fast enough and become influential enough that they can? I don't think, I've made arguments to this, so this is not just an opinion. So I've come to the conclusion on the basis of those arguments that we can't address these other deep issues that are really, you know, concerning people and tearing at the fabric of our society until we address the meaning crisis. I mean, people are so starved for meaning. They're in such a starvation mode, such a scarcity mode, that they're hanging on to whatever they can, and they're getting increasingly narcissistic and defensive and scared about what little shards of meaning they have left. You know, the opposite is true, and the research bears this out, and history shows us. People will go through they will allow you to transform their living standards and things titanically if you offer them meaning to it. Right? If you say, if you come to them and say, I need you to make this huge transformation, right? And here's how meaningful it's, oh, yep, I'll do it. But if you go and say, we need you to make, and they're starving for meaning, no, I won't do, no, right? And so I think the meaning crisis creates a scarcity mentality, a kind of mental fog, and until we get, like again, it's a race. Will this cultural movement, I don't know what to call it without mislabeling it, will that alleviate enough of the meaning crisis so we can escape that mental fog, so we can make the transformations needed? Because like I said, I've lost, with many people, I've lost any kind of faith that our political machinery is going to provide any kind of significant solution to these very exigent problems that we're facing. I hope I'm wrong, but that is what I've concluded.
For people listening, are there any of these people or these organizations you've just mentioned who are trying to resolve this that you might want to point to, direct people towards?
Oh, sure. So yeah, very much. I'm going to be actually talking with some, I forget his last name, and I don't want to misname him. His first name is Guy, but he invented what's the practice called circling. And this is part of a larger movement called the authentic discourse movement. I've got to participate in this movement, and I'm starting to learn more about it. It's a new kind of psychotechnology where what you're trying to do is to resituate discourse back into, right, what we're talking about, where it has the real potential to become dialogue, where you're really, and you're accessing these deeper levels of knowing, the procedural, the perspectival, the participatory, and so what you do is you're learning to get authentic discourse, where the point of the dialogue is not victory or to establish a claim. The point is to deepen the sense of connectedness to yourself and to each other. That's the point of the practice. And I've been through it, you know, and I don't give praise sort of easily. I'm not that kind of guy. But I found the circling event I participated in was one of the most profound experiences I had in my life, because it's like, oh wow, this is what communication and communing can really do for people in terms of giving them insight, afford self-transcendence, bring them access. So the authentic discourse movement, it's a family of movements. It's the circling movement. There's also people like Peter Lindbergh, he's involved in that. He's trying to bring out a practice he calls the anti-debate, which is what you do is when you want to debate people, you say your position, and before I say what mine is, I have to speak back to you what yours is until I get agreement from you that is what you mean and intend, and only then can I respond to it. And when you put that intervening step in, it very quickly shifts off of phileo Nicaea back into philosophia. It really, really does. So there's the authentic discourse movement that's out there. There's people like Rafe Kelly, who he's had me on his podcast. So what he's doing, remember I talked about these other kinds of knowing. He's integrating a set of practices together. He takes people and he teaches them. I'm going to be going on in October on a retreat there. He teaches people how to do parkour, and they go out and they do parkour together out in nature, right? And then they come back around a campfire and then they tell stories about what this means. So you get these transformative practices, and what you have is that people go into this and they come out of it again, same kind of thing. They go, who would have thought that, doing parkour in nature and then sitting around a campfire and talking could be such a profound experience? But that's what they're doing it. Or Mike Nathan, he's a guy, he's running a dojo, right? And what he wants to do, like, he's a martial artist, but he wants to turn the martial arts back and dojos back into places where these adolescents are not just learning martial arts, but what it used to be, they're also cultivating wisdom. He's trying to put together a whole curriculum of integrating a martial arts training with a curriculum of how to cultivate and develop meaning. Those are just some examples, and there's more and more people. There's a secular monastery movement where people are trying to set up monasteries. Remember how we lost them? But that are not committed to an organized religion, but are committed to, explicitly committed to cultivating wisdom, self-transcendence, an ability to connect to other people, to oneself, to reality. This is all happening pervasively.
It's amazing, like this is one of the positive things about the internet, right? And about the social media technology, that it can
facilitate,
network us across time and distance. And we can have this conversation right here, and then we can post it online and people can see it and hopefully get something from it, or at least respond to it and go, no, those guys are talking bullshit.
Yes.
It's like we live in this time where there is so much potential and possibility. We just need to work out how to do it and not fuck it up.
And that's what I meant when I said, remember that virtual originally meant virtue, which was the power to do good. And the virtual world has a lot of potential in it for virtue. And we have to try. That's part of what I'm trying to do with the video series. I'm going to do this one, and then I'm going to do a follow-up, another new video series, right? And all of these are about trying to, actualize this potential, wake people up to these problems, point them to resources, point them to new ways of thinking, give them a vocabulary for talking about and communicating this with other people. That's what I'm doing. It's, and not just me, many other people. Lots of people are doing it with me. I owe a lot. I'm dependent on Christopher Mastropietro and Leonardo Ferraro, right? And Anderson Todd and Jung Sung Kim and all these people who work with me. And not only that, all the people that I'm meeting who are similarly setting up, communities. There's this, I don't know what to call it, corner. It's not a room. There's this corner of the internet. There's my audience, and there's Paul Vanderklay and Jonathan Pajot in the symbolic world, right? And then there's Savella and Quality Existence, and what she's doing. So Jonathan and Paul are Christians, but they're Christians in the sense that I was talking about earlier. People who are really, really taking. Paul talks all the time about my work in the meaning crisis. He takes it very seriously. Same thing with Jonathan, and I've been on their on their channels. And Sevilla, like in Quality Existence, what's she doing? She's using Persig's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance as a text that people can use to try and talk about, well, what is it to have a quality existence? What is it to try and get back to meaning? Like, and we're all talking to each other. We're carving out this space. So I think, I mean, there's just tremendous potential there for, as you said, Owen, for the internet affording networking. I want to, and I'm going to be working with Daniel Craig on this. I want to create basically a virtual wisdom institute. I want to network these communities together to create a collective co-op and kind of a wiki curriculum where we co-write together a shared curriculum, and we vet each other, and we give people access to a wisdom institution that's dynamic and changing, right? And not owned by any one person or group, right? And so that, right, we can give people a way and a place to go to respond to the meaning crisis. So that's very much something that, I mean, you have to be careful, right? You can get grandiose and you can become too self-important, and that's a real danger. But, and I take that seriously. But I'm also moved by what I was saying earlier. This is urgent. We're in a race. Like, we have to do this as much as we can, as fast as we can, as broadly as we can, because things are getting worse faster in a lot of important ways. Like, you know, think about this. Child suicide in the United States has like doubled in the last 10 years. Children committing suicide. Like if that's not a canary, in the mine, what is? Sorry, I got a little passionate there.
I totally share your vision. I think it's one of the most exciting things about our time, and it's certainly what Dylan and I ourselves are trying to get involved with in whatever way we can with doing the podcast. I wonder, what do you think about, I suppose, a criticism that might come up from people who are quite well grounded in, say, a particular tradition, could be Christianity, could be Buddhism, who say, by taking this multi-perspectival, trying to synthesize things approach, you're actually diluting the core of what we're about, and the only way to effectively cultivate wisdom is to do it, if not our way, then to do it one way.
Right. Okay, so there's two responses to that. So let me do both, because the full answer requires both. One is, right, I have made it, and I've talked about this earlier, and this is an important principle. I've made it that, so for when I teach these courses in the university, or when I'm getting into dialogue, people of other faiths, I mean, yeah, some of them will be, but many people say, you know, I learned a lot from you that I found valuable for my own, because you helped me reconnect to my own wisdom tradition. So many people are not responding to this as, you know, you're destroying what I have. You're actually providing me tools with recovering what I still belong to. So that actually happens a lot. And that's why, again, I think it's important. I don't want to crush anybody. Right? That's not, again, what I'm after. Now, that's conjoined to, but nevertheless, shouldn't you belong to one thing? Well, my colleague, Jun-Sung Kim, has found evidence, you know, path immersion, belonging to a path, is very conducive to acquiring wisdom. But you have to pay attention. Here's an analogy I'll use. So the MMA people are kicking the asses of all the purists. They really are. Now that's a path. It's still a path, right? So you have to immerse yourself. You have to train and all that sort of stuff. You're not a dilettante. You're not a dabbler. You have to immerse yourself in it. But you're not a purist. You're by definition a pluralist. And it turns out that gives you a tremendous kind of flexibility, a tremendous kind of resiliency, a tremendous kind of engine of growth and empowerment. And that's my response. That's not just coincidence. That's generally how you really facilitate human growth and development. You want to complexify in that fashion. You want, as we were saying at the very beginning, you want to differentiate and integrate simultaneously. And so I would say that, first of all, as I said, I don't present myself as trying to demolish other people. And I'm willing to enter into real dialogue. And I get very often the response that the people, my interlocutors, find that dialogue beneficial and helpful. And but if somebody sort of points a purist finger at me and starts wagging it, I say no. And I give the example I just gave. No, that's not, yes, you do need to be immersed in a path, but that's not the same thing as, being a purist. It looks like, right, being a complexifier rather than a purist is the best way. Synoptically integrating these things is the best way to actually afford human growth. So that's my response.
I mean, yeah, I've often expressed it. It's like music. It's like there's so many great genres out there. I happen to love heavy metal and techno, but I can also listen to jazz or classical from time to time.
And you should, by the way. I mean, just to put on a cognitive scientist hat for a minute. Like, if you want to be an innovator, if you want to have insight, you have to step outside your domain. It's people who bridge across domains that are the innovators, or the people who bring, who bring new ideas, new ways of doing things to the fore. That's what you have to do.
I guess that's why, traveling and seeing the world and seeing the world through other people's eyes and seeing just how different things are done in different places is so enriching. It's
yes. As long, again, I'm not saying just differentiate. You also have to pursue a very strong compensatory integrative strategy, right? Like, yeah, you have to, I have to do this as a cognitive scientist. I have to get a lot of training in psychology, right, in philosophy and linguistics, in neuroscience and artificial, and then, but then I also have to do a lot of work trying to integrate and bridge them together. You have to do both. That's what I'm saying. So I'm not talking. So that's why I used MMA. They have, you train in multiple martial arts, right? And then you mix them together. You don't just dabble here and there.
I mean, does this reflect the way, for a long time, science seemed to be about differentiating and let's split? And because we worked out that if you split things down into their components, you can actually learn a hell of a lot about them and get
very much.
At running them mechanically, which is kind of the point, but also the problem.
Yes, very much. And so there is now increasingly a move to bring back, not to replace analysis, but to bring back, the word used to be synthesis, but people hear synthetic when you say that. But so to bring back integration and trying to cross these differences and cross these boundaries, be interdisciplinary, create overarching frameworks. And this discussion is, going on now right in psychology about how can we get an overarching, is there anything that can stand as an overarching framework? That's a very serious issue. And so I think more and more people are coming to do that. I hope what they do is remember that that's what philosophy used to do. I mean, in philosophy, one of the things that philosophy did, as opposed to being a particular science, generating a particular kind of knowledge, is it tried to give us synoptic integration. How do all these various kinds of knowledge fit together? How do they all comprehensively hang together in a way that has import and impact on the way I existentially and morally, even aesthetically, live my life? And I think that's why, like I say, you're seeing a revival, at least of ancient philosophia in the modern world right now. It would be good if people got back that appreciation for what it could be, because philosophy and science, in that sense, deeply, deeply need each other. And they shouldn't try to replace each other either.
Yeah.
Philosophers shouldn't make scientific pronouncements, and scientists, I hate it when people like Neil deGrasse Tyson or people like that make pronouncements about philosophy. Like, what? Like, you are not an expert in philosophy. You have no, the fact that you know some physics and so much, in what way does that give you any kind of insight into, the nature or role of philosophy? And, it's right, philosophers shouldn't make pronouncement on scientific questions, but the reverse is also the case. We have to get back to, again, get out of the adversarial mode and get back into, no, we're in a self-correcting mutual relationship. Let's get back to that.
And I think it's quite surprising. It was quite surprising for me when I studied philosophy of science at university.
Yes.
How like this sort of the level of philosophical underpinning that was necessary and philosophical thought before we came up with the idea of science.
Yes. Yes.
It's kind of shocking because, you know, it's very easy to sort of think that science is just this objective thing that can stand on its own.
Yes.
But it's actually built on, you know, the work of like Francis Bacon and Descartes, who were absolutely philosophical in their sort of assertions. And like, you know, you would think that, for example, this sort of the positing the idea that the best way to study the world is with repeatable experimentation. We think now, because that idea is so pervasive, that that's just kind of an objective and obvious thing. But it actually required hundreds of years of philosophical argument that in order to establish that as being its own sort of unique way of acquiring knowledge. And so really, like, and I hate, and again, I don't want to be adversarial about this at all. Like, philosophy underpins, or at least is the progenitor of a lot of science. They used to call it natural philosophy, and that was, you know, that's what Charles Darwin studied. Like,
very much.
And so the two fields are kind of like, you know, they've diverged greatly, but that isn't really to do in my mind, to do with like any process that isn't sociological. They've diverged purely as a result of scientists and philosophers viewing one another as being different.
Yes.
And it's not that there's so much scientific discovery that philosophy somehow became less relevant, or that sort of existentialists, you know, became so sort of like out there that it became impossible for science to engage with. Actually, it was just that the two groups decided to be separate, and if they decided to not be separate, they would not be separate. It's kind of a temporal thing.
I think that's true. I think there's important historical reasons, and I'm going to use this word very broadly construed, political reasons and institutional reasons why that happened. I mean, for example, I can talk about that specifically with my discipline, psychology. Psychology was born directly out of philosophy, and so it had this, I mean, it's almost kind of a bit of a narcissistic thing. It had to, how are we different from the philosophers? This was an overriding, like, perennial, like, so this was an unchallenged thing you did. You made sure that you weren't a philosopher, right? Because that's how you sort of rejected the parent. Oh, wow, that sounds really Freudian. I didn't mean to. But what's happening is, the line between, like when you get into theoretical biology or theoretical physics or even theoretical psychology, the line between the science and the philosophy of the science completely blurs. Trying to say, here's where the philosophy stops and here's where the science picks up. Like when people are in physics, in theoretical physics, are talking about the multiverse, which is not in any way empirically observable. How is that not a philosophical, metaphysical claim? Well, they base it on the math. So did Descartes. I mean, you know, and the first science of the scientific revolution was not an experimental science. The science that drove the scientific revolution, Copernicus, was astronomy, and astronomy is not an experimental science. It's a mathematical theoretical, right? And so, so trying to create, I understand the historical reasons, but I think they're now irrelevant. They're now irrelevant in a really important way. And we got to get back to getting the richest possible discourse. I mean, that's what I do as a cognitive scientist. The richest possible discourse available to us, right? The most complexified, differentiated, but also in analysis, but very powerfully integrated in synthesis, so that we have the best powerful tools for dealing what we need to deal with. And one of the things we need to deal with, of course, is the meaning crisis.
So what do you think are some of the big problems that need to be solved in your discipline at the moment? I suppose meaning crisis being one of them. But where is psychology and cognition?
Okay, so one of the, I mean, there is, I guess, for lack of a better word, there's a framework problem of like what unites, what common language, like if you go to APA, there's all these different divisions. What do they all share other than a label? Is it just nominal, or is like what is it? And So that's, I think, a big problem. And then, of course, there's problems. So I have to be careful because of what I just said. I'm going to talk about problems that I think are big problems for psychology, precisely because they bleed out into problems for people in general. So there's issues about, what is the nature of intelligence? What is the nature of consciousness? Like, how does memory work? What is the self? These are all really important questions. What is meaning in life? And psychology is turning to these now in a way that it wouldn't have done maybe 15 years ago. And it's turning to them and taking them very, very seriously, precisely because these are the kinds of questions that are, of course, not only theoretically foundational and interesting to psychology, there are also ways in which psychology will reverberate back and make an impact on the culture in general. So those are some very, 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 very big questions. And so, and then that fits into, these, I don't want to call them perennial, but these long-standing, debates, and the fact that we're starting to come to transcend them. The nature-nurture debate, and a lot of our politics was grounded in this nature versus nurture distinction. That, is your intelligence largely genetic, or is it largely environmental, or blah, blah, blah. All of that is being sort of radically transcended by, this much more sophisticated dynamical systems approach to understanding development and understanding cognition. And so trying to deal with these emerging new ways of talking about cognition, how does psychology relate to neuroscience and artificial intelligence? I think these are some of the deepest problems. And so one area where that becomes, where I see that coming out of cognitive science and making an increasing impact in psychology per se, is the idea that we are embodied, that we shouldn't think of our cognition as in our brains, that cognition is very much about a brain embodied, and that the body and the what I call the bioeconomy of the body play a significant role in you being a cognitive agent, and that your cognition, and you're also embedded, your cognition is very much about how you're coupled to the environment, much the way in which we think about how organisms are coupled to their environment in niche construction and biology. And so this embodied, embedded, inactive approach that has become very important in cognitive science is now making its way into psychology, and we're starting to see how much those aspects of your being play a role in your psyche, to use the grounding term for psychology. So why is Dylan rocking and nodding as he's listening to me, right? What is that doing for him, right? And so if I limit his rocking and his nodding, will that actually impact on his ability to process what I'm saying? Yeah, it will make an impact.
I think it would make a pretty big impact, actually, without sort of like some form of fidgeting. Instead of, if I don't have something in my, if I'm not doing something sort of like with my hands or my feet, then just other shit starts firing off in my brain, and I lose sight of what's in front of me.
but you're also communicating and processing, because you're nodding, right, and you're rocking in rhythm with the cadence of what I'm saying. And why are you doing that? Because you're trying to tap into lower levels of your own processing to help interpret what I'm saying and make it more accessible to you. You're doing all of that.
Wow, yeah, I guess.
Yeah, very much.
Cool. But it makes a lot of sense. But it's like, it's intuitive, but then there's always going to be sort of a faction, maybe not a faction, an urge, I think, to be like, but can we prove it?
Well, but here's two things I want to say to that. First of all, science doesn't prove anything. Science provides arguments and evidence. Math is where you can get proof. Logic is where you can get proof. And those are just dependent on which axiomatic system you want to use anyways. And Gödel, you can't prove all your axioms, blah, 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 blah.
No non-arbitrary set of axioms will be able to prove the complete set of truths.
That's right. So all of that. So let's put all that aside. But what I would want to say is another important point. Don't confuse properties of your theory with properties of what your theory is about. I can have an explicit formalized theory of intuition or the flow state. I've done that. I've published on that, right? So although I'm using language and logic and reason and math to talk about these phenomena, that doesn't mean that that's how those phenomena are operating. Neither does it mean that because those phenomena operate intuitively and in a participatory manner, that I can't talk about them propositionally, theoretically. Of course I can. Because I don't need properties of my theory and properties of my referent to be shared. I don't need my theory of metaphor to be metaphorical. I don't need my theory of vagueness to be vague. I don't need my theory of the past to be only in the past. I mean, as soon as I say that, those are ridiculous claims, right? So if we keep those two, I mean, I think people who are making, I'm not attributing this to you guys, but I think people who are making that accusation, right, are confusing those two things together, right? Right? And so, and you shouldn't confuse. You shouldn't even confuse phenomenological mystery with theoretical inexplicability. Look, here's what I mean. And this is an important thing to say. Like, so perspectival knowing is, you know what it means? Like, means like to have a perspective, like, you know, a perspective is like things are foregrounded, things are backgrounded. There's a salience landscape, right? This is what it's like to be here now, to have this perspective. Is that okay? I mean, there's lots more, but I'm just trying to get the idea out there. Okay, you know what I can't have? I can't have a perspectival, participatory knowing of what it's like to be dead. Because if I try and imagine myself dead, I can't, because my perspectival way, and I'm participating in, and I'm there, right? So I can't participate. I can't have a perspectival, participatory knowing of what it's like to be dead. Now, does that prove that I'm immortal? Of course not, right? The fact that something is phenomenologically mysterious, and it's important that it's phenomenologically mysterious, because it tells you a fundamental way in which I'm connected to myself, right? That I'm deeply embodied, right? That's important. But the fact that it's phenomenological mystery doesn't license any metaphysical conclusions that I'm immortal or I've always existed or something like that. So you gotta be really careful. Don't confuse properties of theories with properties what your theory is about. Don't confuse phenomenological mysteries, which are real and important, with claims that things are theoretically inexplicable, or it's all due, it's, you know, that you've got something inside of you made out of dead elves or some weird metaphysics or something like that. Right? You just have to be really, really careful. You have to take great care. And again, if you're not giving into the bullshitting of wanting to be victorious, but if you really want to learn, then you will take great care. When you're in Philonikeia, you're driven to victory. That's why it's bullshitting, right? Because you don't take great care. You're driven to what is the most expedient and powerful way to achieve the victory, right?
This reminds me greatly of I think it was Aristotle said in answer to what is a man. He said, a man is an animal that walks on two legs and does not have feathers. And then Diogenes obviously shows up and plucks a chicken and says, behold, a man.
Yes, it was actually Plato, but yes, that's right. Yeah, Diogenes, the battle between Diogenes and Plato is actually a really, really important one, because it represents, the reason I'm interested in it, sorry, this is sort of self-promotional. The series I'm going to do next is called After Socrates, in the double meaning of the word. I'm trying to take a look at what came at Socrates in more depth, what came out of Socrates, like Stoicism, existentialism, Platonism, Neoplatonism. But I'm also after Socrates. I'm pursuing Socrates at the same sense. I'm trying to get at that. And both the Cynics and Plato, of course, right, are both movements coming out of Socrates and both having an allegiance. And what I'm trying to get at is, can we integrate back the different streams and sort of multi-triangulate back to get to the depths of what's there, so that we can make this Socratic way of life, this philosophia, available to us again as a powerful way of responding to the meaning crisis. So that's you saying that was just triggering all of that for me right now. So thank you for that.
Oh, cool. Don't worry. Yeah. Wow. That's I'll certainly be following you on that journey then, because I'd love to see where it goes.
Yeah, I was part of what triggered it was how the deep sort of response I got to the parts of the video that were about sort of Socrates and Plato, a lot, and the Cynics and the Stoics, people really, really resonated with that. Again, I don't think that's a coincidence, and it's not because I was particularly eloquent or brilliant or anything like that. I think it's because these people are seeing, oh, wait, there's philosophia, and philosophia is about cultivating wisdom and responding to this crisis of meaning, and so I want more of this. Yeah.
I think there's something about Socrates and the Socratic method that is inherently more appealing than, say, philosophy by long tract.
Yeah, yes. I mean, well, so, because, I mean, I'm reading a couple of excellent books right now. Here, they're actually nearby. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we lost audio just for a second.
Yeah, just for a second. I hit the mic. There's a couple of books I'm reading right now that are, there's this one by, I really recommend this book by Sarah Abel-Rappe, Socratic Ignorance and Platonic Knowledge in the Dialogues of Plato, and then this book by Gonzalez, Dialectic and Dialogue, Plato's Practice of Philosophical Inquiry. And what these are both getting, and other people, and I think this ultimately goes back to Pierre Hadot's great work, right, is, again, understanding the Socrates method and the Platonic dialogues as a practice, like the way you practice a martial art or the way you practice Buddhism, right? It's a practice. It's a way of life where the fruits are not conclusions, right, of arguments. The fruits are transformations of character, and that's the main thing that I want to try and, if I can, I want to try and make available to people in the next series. Yeah, because it's the open, and you see, and I'm really interested, and Peter and I want to talk to Guy about this. I'm really interested about trying to recover, the Platonic dialogue and the Socratic and Lenkos, and how does that integrate with this authentic discourse movement, in which people are more concerned about transforming consciousness and cognition and establishing deep connection and recovering, a kind of authentic way of knowing than they are about, establishing particular conclusions. I want to see how this recent movement and that ancient movement can talk to each other and perhaps enliven and enrich each other.
I think there's something interesting, like I experience when we've been doing the podcasts, is that we when it's going well, we enter into a kind of dialogue where I feel like I'm almost at the edge of what I know and speaking without really knowing what's coming next at all. It's like improvisation, which I play music. I'm a guitarist, and I experience the same thing when I'm jamming, playing a lead line or something. And it's like, I don't really know what's happening, but it's coming this right now.
We're getting into the flow state. And you can get into the flow state in conversation. You don't have to just get into the flow state by rock climbing or doing athletics or doing Tai Chi Chuan. Those are all great, and I do some of those. I do Tai Chi, for example. But another way in which you can get into the flow state, you can get into the flow state in conversation. You can get into an optimal form of experience and performance collectively, and we can create something. Plato had this idea of like a logos, right? Something emerges between us that we cannot individually create on our own, and I think that's a very important phenomena we got to recover and make more available. What's the right word? Make it more. I wanted to say safeguard it, but that's not quite the right word. We have to make it more present for people so they can get more access to it.
I think this is what's great about the YouTube and podcast revolution. I think we can call it a revolution. I think we will look back on it and call it a revolution, because really now long form dialectic can be available in the same way a book.
Yes, and see, I was like this going into the series, because I'm offering complex arguments that last for an hour on YouTube, right? And of course, I wasn't expecting hundreds of thousands of views or anything like that, but I'm getting tens of thousands of views, and that again, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to take credit. I'm trying to say that's very, very encouraging. It's like people are willing to commit this is, there's been 30 videos. That's 30 hours of often, difficult thinking and, reflecting. And many people tell me that they watch the videos multiple times and then they meet up and talk about it. So people will take up this practice. They will. It won't be everybody, of course, or even the majority of people. But can YouTube facilitate something like this? Looks like it can. Seems like it can. That's why, like I said, I'm going to do this second series precisely because I'm excited about it. I'm excited about the potential.
It's amazing. It feels like I don't know, it's not replacing education, but it's like a new form of education.
Yeah, I don't want to replace education. I think that, yeah. I'm glad you said that, Owen, because this is very much, I think of it as an extension of education, and a way of trying to, see, so the video series, it points both ways. It's useful to my students. They can go to it, because I've synthesized integrated material from multiple courses in there, so they can go and watch the videos. So it's helpful to my formal students, but it also makes available to people who are not academic or no longer in academia, the fruits of academia that might be sort of personally and existentially relevant. So I try to make it so it points both ways. It extends the education. That's how I try to think of it.
I think that's what it opens academia up in a way.
Yes.
That it's not like you've got academics essentially publishing their ideas in books which are difficult to read, and often the layperson will never hear of them anyway.
Yes.
As well as expensive.
Yes. And so they have a very small audience. I mean, look, let's be honest. I wouldn't have met you guys, right? If it wasn't for the video series, if it wasn't for this. That's why it happened. The chances that you're going to read one of my scientific articles or that you're going to show up at the University of Toronto one of my classes is very small. But, right, we can have a genuine, and I think, well, it's been for me, but it seems like a mutually enriching dialogue precisely because of YouTube and of the internet. So, yeah, again, there is increasing evidence that this can be used powerfully and well for good. And I don't believe in destiny. But I do hope that the more and more people that participate in this, that we can win the race in some important way.
I guess we've only got a couple minutes left now, really, and something that it's just such a shame, but something we like to ask all of our guests is, what's something that you think people, especially young people, should know about the world towards which we're moving, and what can they take on board? What should we be doing?
So this is what I would say. The artificial general intelligence revolution is coming. And the things that we used to think were really sort of quintessential about sort of being a successful human being, a lot of those are gonna fall by the wayside. And your capacities for insight and wisdom and the cultivation of meaning and self-transcendence, those are the things you better put a lot more emphasis on. You better give them much greater priority. That's what I would say.
Wow. Certainly good advice. Hopefully will be put into practice by certainly me, but many of the people who've watched this. So yeah, it's been great talking to you. It's been a very, very interesting discussion.
I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Sorry if I sometimes I spoke very rapidly. I get very passionate about some of these topics. I hope for the forbearance of your listeners.
Well, it's certainly good to be passionate, especially on the topics that we've covered. I certainly think. Is there anything you want to plug?
Well, I mean, I want to plug my existing series, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, the first book, the one I wrote with Christopher Mastropietro and Philip Misovic, Zombies in Western Culture, a 21st Century Crisis, because that's the beginning of a set of 4 books on the meaning crisis. Chris and I are working on the second book on Sheltered, the genealogy of the meaning crisis, which is coming out. I'm working on another book that's going to be coming out called The Cognitive Continuum, From Insight to Enlightenment. I'm working on that with Daniel Craig and Madeline Abramian. And then finally, a plug for the next series after Socrates, which I'm gonna start working on very shortly.
I'm going to be looking out for it.
Oh, thank you guys. Thank you a lot. I really enjoyed this. And well, keep up the good work. Keep up the good fight.
Likewise.
Great.
All right.
See you guys in the next episode of Technosocial.